Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our October episode and our first of 2025 of the Dóchas webinar and podcast series. My name is Shauna. I sit on the Mental Health and Wellbeing working group in the Irish Sport Agency. I've been living in Sydney for the last 7 years and working as a nurse. So it's wonderful to be back with you for the Dóchas episode tonight. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Gadigal people. I also acknowledge that the traditional custodians of the various lands of which all of you are watching, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Dóchas will be brought to you on the first Monday of each month, with each episode covering a different aspect of health and wellbeing. All of our previous webinars can be found on the Irish Sport Agency YouTube channel and in podcast format on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions throughout the conversation this evening, please feel free to pop in the chat and ask any questions. It is a conversational, educational session tonight for everyone participating. Tonight, I'm delighted to be joined with Dr. Kate Fennessy, a senior clinical psychologist from St. Vincent's Hospital. She's part of the Gamble Aware team, and we're putting gambling under the microscope. Australia has some of the world's highest gambling rates, and for Irish migrants, this can be a shocking reality check. From pokies on every corner to constant sports betting ads, gambling is everywhere. In this webinar, we'll uncover why gambling is so widespread in Australia, exploring how addiction helps and reveal the early warning signs everyone should know of. You'll discover practical ways to support loved ones and learn about available treatments. So Dr. Kate Fennessy has greatly put together a presentation for us all today, which she will go through. If anyone does have any questions along the way, please, as I said, pop a question in the box or feel free to ask at any time. She will have an opportunity for questions at the end. But otherwise, Kate, we welcome you tonight to Dóchas. And if you'd like to give us a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how widespread gambling is here in Australia for us all this evening.
Thank you, Shauna. And hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to be joining you. I feel like when I first started working in this area 10, 12 years ago now, there wasn't much opportunity to speak, provide much education outside kind of medical settings. And certainly in the media and things, this topic is more and more in our public consciousness and dialogue. So I'm really pleased to be joining you. And as Shauna said, please ask me questions as we go, because it might be a little more interesting if you're wondering, and if you have a question, probably other people are wondering too. So yes, as Shauna said, I work as a psychologist in a gambling specific service in St. Vincent's Hospital. So this is your local, if you live in, the Coogee or the eastern suburbs area. In Australia, or in New South Wales anyway, gambling revenue, it makes up 10% of the New South Wales government revenue, actually, is profits from gambling. So that goes up into the government, and a small amount of that revenue pays for services like mine, so pays my wage. I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal and Bidjigal country tonight, and want to welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us or listening to the recording later on, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Aboriginal people were the first healers of this place, so I also like to acknowledge that. This artwork is from Lani Balzan, a Wiradjuri woman, and she painted it for the hospital where I work. And the yellow dot is the hospital, represents the hospital, and the purple is the communities and people working together to further Indigenous outcomes in health. It's also customary in this kind of area in mental health and addiction to just acknowledge that people have lived experience of gambling harm, whether it's your own gambling or the gambling of someone else. People listening or joining tonight will be at various ends of the scale, with that either having absolutely no personal experience or being an expert yourself. So wanting to acknowledge that too. I tend to start at the beginning. I know it seems obvious, but what is gambling? Because I do hear some different definitions. So the one I like to use is this one: risking something of value for the chance to win something of greater value, meaning that you're risking something, which is the stake, on the outcomes of chance, which is the bet, to win a prize. So you need those three ingredients for it to be gambling: the stake, the bet, and the prize. Gambling is normal, seems to have been around since human beings have been around. And it also seems to be the case that a proportion of people who gamble have had problems throughout history as well. Most people who gamble historically and today do so without severe ill effect. And so if someone in your life is gambling, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have a problem with it. But in the last couple of 100 years, we know that, with smartphones and advent of technology, we can gamble a lot more money a lot faster. And in Australia anyway, I'm sure it was global, but in Australia in particular, a lot of people could gamble online, and it pushed lots of sports betting to be, people were gambling on things like Norwegian hurling and things in the middle of the night. So types of gambling that we're talking about, in Australia, this will look different in Ireland, but there are three main categories. Wagering, which is betting on a real world outcome like two floods crawling up a wall, or a sports match, or a dog race, or a horse race. Gaming is the second category, in no particular order. Playing a game of chance. So you'll notice that here in New South Wales in particular, there are these pokey machines on every street corner, pretty much in every pub and club. So that's a game where you need to basically know how the game works, but there's not much skill or strategy to it, depending on who you speak to. Whereas there are other games like blackjack or poker where there's a little more room for strategy, potentially. And the third category, which I'm not sure, perhaps there'll be questions about this later, there often are, but it's the emergent forms. And that is a huge and varied list of different technology or gaming related features. Some jurisdictions think it's gambling, some don't. There's a lot of debate with a lot of these things. Some are a little bit more obvious. So one example of that is esports, where the athlete is the gamer and you're wagering on who's going to shoot the next zombie or who's going to get to the next level. So that's pretty clearly gambling, whereas non-fungible tokens might not be seen as gambling by many people. I'm so sorry. Hopefully I don't lose my voice. But yes, as Shauna indicated, in Australia, gambling is a really widely accepted part of our culture, and I'm not precisely sure why that is the case. We do have ideas about the fair go and being the lucky country, and things like playing two up, I think was from the First World War times. And it's also fair to say that our legislation and our advertising laws and those types of things have really encouraged gambling. Even still, participation in gambling in Australia is declining. These new generations coming through are not gambling half as much. And that's the case for drug and alcohol use as well. You can see that steady decline since 2011 or so. But even still, we do have the highest number of gaming machines, so these pokey machines, per person in the world. And it's by a long shot, in fact. Most of these are in New South Wales. And our losses in terms of the, raw currency of how much we lose are by far the highest in the world. So they're more than double the next on the list, which is Singapore. And that's, again, per person. So it's around about $25 billion a year, and around a quarter of that total is just on pokies, just in New South Wales. So in New South Wales in particular, we are the most heavily impacted place on earth in terms of gambling. And I think that's not really widely known. It equates to around $1,500 per New South Welsh person. And I know I didn't spend that in the last calendar year. So we know that people who have problems are more like over the $20,000 per year spend on average. So obviously, if someone's on a very high income, that's not that impactful. But if someone's on a pension, then that's huge. So when people come for formal help, we're thinking about their losses in proportion to their income. So anyway, even though that the gambling participation is falling year on year, the profits are going up, the gambling expenditure, so from the punters' pockets, those losses are increasing year on year. So you've got this bi-directional effect where the people who are gambling are spending more and more, And that rate is increasing at, you guessed it, in New South Wales much more rapidly than in Australia overall. So it's a really big public health issue in Australia, particularly in New South Wales. But estimates really vary because it's quite hard to, it's often not disclosed, and it's quite hard to measure for that reason. So again, do interrupt me if you have questions, otherwise I'll just rattle on through. So you will hear people talking about gambling harm, and that just means negative consequences of any kind. People tend to think about money, but it's not just about the money. It's not necessarily proportional to the amount of gambling or like the frequency of gambling or how much money is lost. But you can see on this pie chart on the slide, although I just remember that maybe people aren't watching this, but anyway, I will describe it. Around about 25% of the gambling harms that people say, look, this is the region of my life that is being harmed by my gambling, is relationships. So that's a big one, takes a big hit. Second on the list is health, and then there's emotional and psychological harms as well. Financial is 15%, work and study is impacted too, but that's much smaller. And then there's other harms, which is a bit of a catch-all, but at least some of those harms will be legal in nature because sometimes people may commit offences as a result of desperation caused by gambling. So, yes, anyway, gambling can impact a person's finances, mental health, daily functioning, and it can be one type of harm in one domain or extreme harm in multiple domains. And the harms might be acute or chronic or legacy in nature. And of course, it's not so simple. There might be a mutually reinforcing effect of intersecting harms as well. So this quite interesting, well, interesting to me, the Lancet published a Public Health Commission on Gambling paper last year. And it's a good read. It looks at the global impact of gambling harm, and it has actually quotes from people globally. So this is an example of one from Josh in Australia. He said, in the foreseeable next 5 to 10 years, like, I'm not going to be able to buy a new car. I'll live month to month. I earn above average wage as well. So realistically, I shouldn't be struggling. But the gambling, there's a legacy gambling there. I constantly can't move past it. Like, that is a long-lasting effect of gambling. I'm 40 and I don't see a future for me at all. So how common is it really? In Australia, or actually, I think this is New South Wales, 1 in 5 people experience harm from their own gambling or another person's gambling. So that's pretty common. That's around about the same incidence as any mental health condition. So if you are of lower socioeconomic status, there can be higher incidence of harms, and because people are spending proportionately more of their disposable income. But that being said, it doesn't discriminate. You know, people from any walk of life can have harm from gambling. At my service, we see a lot of actually quite high income earners, and people from any gender or background can be impacted by gambling too.
Hey, what would be your most common age group of people coming in for different assistance?
Age group. I think it's probably, this is a guess, but I think it's probably between 30 and 40 years old. But that doesn't mean that that's who's experiencing gambling outside of treatment. So, because people may be in contemplation about what to do about their gambling for a while before actually accessing help. So we usually see that a delay, unfortunately. And I think it's getting faster and faster. And, we'll see people as young as 16 come through because we don't see children, but, under 16. But that's probably the biggest age group. But generally speaking, the highest risk, and I think I've got it here somewhere, is the highest risk group is males 18 to 24. And then the second largest group is actually women over the age of 45. And there's probably some social reasons for that. So all these images are sourced from the GambleAware website. So people can feel free to go and have a look. I think sometimes people are interested in what is a risky type of gambling. I mean, any type of gambling can be risky. Gaming machines, so pokies, are still the most risky. And I think that's why we see such a big problem in New South Wales. but also people who gamble online frequently. So things like fantasy sports, the gambling kind of fantasy sports, that's more likely to be high risk. And people who gamble once a week or more, which is not surprising. Casino table games more than once a week is also a risky form of gambling. We also see that people are moving more and more online, which is kind of not surprising, for their race betting or their sports betting on their smartphones. And, it's around 1 to 2% of people experience high-risk gambling, and that's probably who we see coming through to formal treatment. But a lot of people, as I'll talk about, get better without having help, like professional help. It's just kind of good to know that there is professional help there if that's the preference. So people who are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in Australia are 3 times more likely to have harmful gambling, unfortunately. And people of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, which includes Irish people coming to Australia, are less likely to gamble, but those who do at least weekly are at a higher risk. And similarly, women under 40 are less likely, but those who do at least weekly are at higher risk of having harms from that. So when we're talking about risks, I think I'm kind of repeating myself here, sorry, but we're talking about risk of harm, what you do or what you don't do in order to access the money or to neglect due to the gambling or its after effects, because there's a sort of a gambling hangover, feeling badly after a gambling episode, for example, or risks to things like food, shelter and safety. I know I'm picking kind of extreme examples here. The other kind of group of things that we think about in terms of the negative effects are the social impairment. So conflict in your relationships or not being able to focus at work, that kind of thing. So people who themselves have been gambling can be at harm, but also there's estimates that for every person who themselves is gambling, 6 people around them are affected. That is often quoted, but it's actually just someone's guess. But women, people who live with children, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are most at risk of being harmed by the gambling of another person as well. And that latter thing is partly because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture is collectivist, so sharing of resources is really normal, and so you may be expected to provide money to somebody who's been gambling, and that can impact you, of course. And I think the women and people who live with children are more about that family network. So it can be a little hard to relate, I think, if you've never had an addiction yourself, or you've never gambled yourself problematically. But I just wanted to put some quotes here about why people say that they continue to gamble after experiencing harm or wanting to stop. So Joan, for example, says, I gamble because I'm lonely. And Paul said, it makes me feel smart. I'm not good at anything else. So you can see that there's a big range of reasons, and the reasons why people may have started to gamble may be quite different from the reasons why they continue to take that decision later, further down the line. Oftentimes, I feel like I've kind of accidentally done a negative slant on this presentation, but I didn't mean for that to sound like this. But oftentimes when people come into treatment, they're gambling to try and solve a problem. So they may be feeling debt or in pressure from having had a gambling problem for a while, and they're chasing their losses by continuing to take the decision to gamble.
Yeah, okay, that was just a question someone put in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
What makes someone start gambling in the first place? Is it like more entertainment seeking or the desire to win money?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I don't really get to know why people might just be having non-harmful or fun gambling, but people usually say that it's just opportunity. It could be to change their mood. It could be for fun. It could be, and I think it often is in Australia anyway, a coming of age thing that you might start. The reason why culturally and linguistically diverse background people may be more at risk in Australia is because they're coming from elsewhere. They don't have their social networks so solid, and gambling is everywhere here. So it's a complete change of routine, perhaps earning more money or different hours. And I think sometimes that can place people at risk. But anyway, again, I'm talking about the risky one. They may be introduced to gambling by other people in their community as well. So it's partly the person, of course, making the decision, but it is also the environment is a big factor too. So I don't know is the short answer. But, within certain groups or to feel part of a community or to feel connected to other people, that can also be a reason. One of the questions that was put to me before tonight was what happens in the brain, which is, of course, another long answer. So I thought I would just show you what we talk about with people who come into treatment, and you can just let me know if I'm off track. But there's a reward center in our brain, right down in our brainstem, and that reward center, which is not the technical name for it, but is shared by all animals, actually, and we're built to listen to it. It's a very powerful part of our brain, and it keeps us alive and keeps us reproducing. And food, exercise, and sex floods that area with dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that we make ourselves. And alcohol and drugs and gambling flood that area, hijack it almost, with hundreds of times more dopamine than a natural reward does, and much more regularly. So if you're gambling and you just completely lose, or you feel like you nearly, you're watching the horse race and it nearly got up, but it wasn't quite there, you'll still get dopamine in that session, because it's about anticipation, the next spin or the next moment, what's going to happen. So when we gamble, and one of the main predictors of someone later developing a gambling problem is having a large win early on in the course of things. So let's say they gamble and win, their rational center up here in the prefrontal cortex, where we're like making decisions consciously and making plans and goals and saying, Kate, what do I want? What am I doing? That rational center will say, that was great, let's do it again. And so we'll move our body through the action center to go and gamble again, potentially. And after a while of that habit going around that cycle a few times, our brain, which likes efficiencies, makes it automatic. So in response to an urge from my reward center, I'll just move my body to go gambling and kind of leave the prefrontal cortex out of it. It's not that I'm not conscious, but I'm not thinking it through. It's like when I just drove to work this evening, I've done that drive so many times, I just sort of woke up and I was here, so to speak. Hopefully I was conscious during the drive. So the good news about that is that our brain is plastic. It moves in accordance to what we think or what we do in our lives. So when people come into treatment, or even when they're not in treatment and they think, I need to do something differently, and they change their habits, their brain will also change accordingly. So in response to an urge, their rational center will kick in because of the reflection that they've been doing or the changes that they've made. And they may still gamble, or they may move their body and do something else. So just as I'm usually drawing people pictures during this, so forgive me, but in the brain, the rule is what wires together, fires together. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? What fires together, wires together. So if you go down one neural pathway lots and lots of times, it becomes really wide and thick and strong in the connection that it has. And if you don't use it for a while, it grows over again. It doesn't go away completely, but it's like a path you haven't walked down in a long time, and it's harder to access that. And the same is true for gambling. So if you stop gambling and you don't gamble for a long time, it will still be there, but it's harder to access in response to your triggers, so to speak. I hope that makes sense. So that was the very long, rambly explanation of what happens in your brain, but I have left some links in this later on, so you can just watch a video of it. It's probably simpler. So in terms of people who actually come to help, and I'll talk a bit about what the options are anyway in a moment, but people who have problems with gambling really do not do this. So we're a very busy service, but it's a very small proportion of people who have a gambling problem actually take the step to come in. And there are various reasons for that, and hopefully that's changing. But one of them is the fact that it's stigmatized, and people are very ashamed if they have a gambling problem. They often will think it's a character flaw or a moral failing, or because they're not taking in, like alcohol, for example, into their body, they think they should just be able to stop a little easier because it's not a substance. It's actually quite tricky to stop for lots of reasons. If you're from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, it's even lower engagement in treatment, although we see about 50% of people who come here are from varied backgrounds. When people come along, it's pretty common that no one else in their life knows about the gambling because it's common to lie or hide the gambling when it's problematic. And if they have been, in touch with their GP, they may not have been asked about this. And of course, if they have asked, sometimes it's not been disclosed. So it's often missed. Excuse me. So if you know someone who has a gambling problem, I think it's pretty good to understand this little spiral, which you may have seen before. It's called The Stages of Change by Prochaska and DiClemente, and it describes the fact that change is hard, that in order to change, we need to go through a period of ambivalence first, and we need some good reasons to change. So when it comes to, and I call them addictions, but I mean, you might have your own language for that. When it comes to these types of habits, people might be in that top circle, the pre-contemplation. They don't have any intention on changing their behavior. They don't think it's a problem themselves. They could stay there forever. They may sometimes contemplate it. They might then move to preparation and action and take action on changing their habits. And then what we want to see in treatment is that maintain that change over time. But we do know that progress can be bumpy and people can have a few lapses or relapses along the way of changing. But it's also true that in one conversation, people might move from, like, I'm preparing to take action about this, all the way back to pre-contemplation, and so on. So people can move around the circle quite a lot. So you yourself might think this is a problem, and the person, of course, may not, or vice versa. So we don't use judgmental language. It doesn't help, but I think it's good to be frank, saying what you see while you're worried about that person.
Someone just asked, what are the early warning signs that someone may be struggling with gambling and moving from like casual gaming to addiction?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I have. Oh, it's not a very good answer here that I have. Oftentimes, the only way that you're going to be able to see it is if the money doesn't really add up. If they're earning good money and they don't seem to have any, or, there's no other explanation for that. So, it's not like other kind of addictive disorders where there may be other signs to that. It's oftentimes very easy to hide for a very long time. And sometimes people are quite shocked because someone that they know really well comes out with the fact that they've been having a problem with this for a long time. It can be very surprising. Becoming withdrawn, obviously struggling or feeling like they're dropping out of contact or they don't want to meet up and it doesn't make sense. And the money is a big one. Unless you're actually seeing them gambling. If you're seeing them gambling and they're very focused and they're going at a very high rate or like a lot of money compared to, I don't know, what everyone else is doing, that they can be signs too, but often you're not seeing it. It's often something that happens alone. The other things like, looking down and not enjoying everyday activities, that can be any other kind of mental health condition, or it could just be that, they are busy and not connecting with you at that point in time. So it's really, really hard to know if it's gambling or something else. I hope that answers the question. So, I think it's good to offer to help if you can and to listen non-judgmentally, and make sure to take care of yourself too. There are resources online and people who have partners or family members or are affected by the gambling of another person can also come into treatment. And we're seeing that more and more, that people are wanting help because their child or their parent or their partner is gambling and they just want to know the right thing to do, how to help them the best way or how to look after themselves as well. The broad brush advice for family members is to avoid giving that person money or large amounts of money, let's say, because that can often set them up to trip up. But trying to assist in other ways, so emotionally being there, buying groceries for them, for example, or cooking them dinner or checking in. That can be really important. So I don't know if this is so relevant to you, but people like to know, I guess it's more in medical settings, how to detect potentially the presence of people having a gambling problem in a general population. So maybe you might be interested in the questions. So these are drawn from the DSM-5 criteria for gambling problems. During the past 12 months, have you become restless, irritable, or anxious when trying to stop or cut down on your gambling? So that's like a withdrawal syndrome. Just like when people are drinking heavily and then they stop, their body is used to drinking, so they'll get a group of symptoms that is like the opposite of the effect of alcohol. So they might feel anxious or be shaky, have poor sleep, that kind of thing. The same is true of gambling, and it's about 6 weeks of being very irritable, grumpy, and restless. So have you tried to keep your family and friends from knowing? That's very common. And did you have financial trouble as a result? So there's also this one that's 2 questions. Are you lying to others, or are you betting more than you intended? And if you answer yes to any of these questions, you may have a problem with gambling that might warrant some further investigation. The betting more than you intended is that loss of control piece, going along thinking, I'm just going to put $50 in and see what happens. And then you end up, spending a lot more time. And this is the screener for one question. Have you ever had an issue with gambling? I'm sorry, this is a little medical, but doctors are always asking me, they say, I don't have time. I just want to ask one question. And that's my mission, is to get medical people asking this question ever. It never happens, but we'll get there. So in terms of like what is available, a lot of people get better from gambling independently. And I'll talk about some ways in which people can do that and some resources that they can lean on in a moment. In terms of formal help, though, there's a national gambling helpline. Again, it's funded by gambling revenue. It's 24/7. You'll always speak to someone different, just like other helplines. But it can also point you in the direction of your local services and what resources there are. There's the National Debt Helpline, which we like because sometimes people feel quite trapped by the financial implications, and they have financial counsellors and practical strategies on what to do there to reduce or eliminate debt sometimes. And then the national website for gambling help is called Gambling Help Online, and that's got community forums. Some of the aspects are self-help or forum moderated forums and live text counselling. So I work for an agency that's funded by New South Wales Gamble Aware, and there's a Gamble Aware service in every local health district. And so that's the website for like the New South Wales specific one. So we also have peer workers in every area. So actually, I'll talk in a moment about what actually we have. But there's a state-specific gambling help service in every state in Australia. There's a New South Wales Aboriginal Safe Gambling Program as well for Aboriginal people, but it's pretty limited. It's like 3 staff for the whole state. So sometimes they'll point to us, the Gamble Aware too. And there's the multicultural gambling counselling in language support and in culture support as well. So this is the service that I work for. It's just an example service. There's lots like ours. Although I think we're probably the main one in the state at the moment in terms of size, but we have psychologists delivering a structured evidence-based psychological treatment. So it goes through a series of skills. We see people who gamble themselves and others affected. And we also have financial counselling, which is really important too. We help people ban themselves from venues as well, or point them in the direction of how they can do that themselves. And we have our peer worker. So a peer worker is somebody who's experienced gambling harm themselves and often gotten better, because sometimes people want to talk to someone who's been there. So every local health district has now at least 1 or 2 peer workers. We also, I also wanted to include the fact that I mentioned before that people can get better themselves. One of the ways in which people do that is by changing how they handle their money or what they're doing with their time or their access to venues. I mean, sometimes it's not so simple, but sometimes putting those roadblocks in place can lead them to have a bit more space to do something different. So these are the links for banning yourself from, for example, the local pokey rooms around where you live. So the way that works is you send an image of yourself around on that website, not around, directly to the venues that you've chosen. And you also select, do I just want the pokey rooms? Do I want to not be able to gamble at all in that venue? Or do I want to ban myself from the whole venue, which is very rare. But I guess sometimes that's relevant. And then you choose how long you want that to be in place for. And the way that it works is that if you did go into that pokey room, then someone should tap you on the shoulder and say, excuse me, you kept Fennessy, you need to be in the main bar. And they're usually quite, hopefully, very subtle about that. And I think part of the reason why it can work so well is the fear of that happening means that you won't risk it. And you just have to change that automatic pattern and go elsewhere if you wanted to gamble. I've left the link here as well for the casino self-exclusion, which is permanent. You can go through a process to have it lifted, and it means that you won't be able to go past the security barriers in the casinos. So if there's restaurants or bars inside that security, that also includes all of that. That third point is BetStop, which is in Australia, the National Self-Exclusion Register. So it blocks access to bookies in Australia. So it doesn't block bookies from Ireland, but that's the Australian one, betstop.gov.au, and you can block yourself from being able to open accounts within a certain period of time. I think it's 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. There's a few options. There's 5 years, and then there's indefinite. I never want to be able to have an Australian betting account. And there's a TAB, freestanding tab, banning thing as well. So I've sort of jumped to this. It's just one lever that people can pull, and we like to include it in presentations because it's not known about. But for a lot of people, that won't suit them, and that's perfectly fine.
Hey, for people availing of your Gamble Aware programs, do they have to go to their own local district group, or can they go like elsewhere if they wanted to remain anonymous in their own community?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's very anonymous. The services are very anonymous. We're not linked to Medicare, for example. Our service at St Vincent's, we don't put notes online. No other staff members throughout the hospital would know that you attend this service unless you tell them. We actually have paper files, and a lot of the services are very careful about that because it prevents people from coming to see them. And we do care about keeping people's confidentiality safe. But I guess there's always a risk that you see someone in a waiting room or something. So it's true. I can only speak for my service. We do accept out of area referrals, but sometimes we'll say, have you checked with your local service? Have you tried them first? If they absolutely insist that they want to come to see us, most of the time we can say yes to that. But during times of really high demand, sometimes we do close that provision as well. The answer is yes, you can go out of area. Was there another part to that question?
No, that was perfect.
Okay, so there's also Gamban, or other software that blocks gambling sites, and that would include like overseas bookies, for example. You can't be uninstalled, but it's a subscription. So if your payment lapses, then it stops working these days. It used to be a bit more, uninstallable. There's also some other resources here that I've just dropped for, how to keep track of your gambling, or maybe how to do some self-help skills and things to try to manage your gambling better, not necessarily to stop. And this is another important point, actually. In order to actually come along and get help for gambling, you don't need to have decided to stop gambling. Usually we see people in two minds about it. Occasionally we see people who are absolutely done, with it. But it could be just worth a look with someone else too. 100-day challenge, I believe that's an app where there's a community forum which is very supportive, and it's gambling specific. There's Gamblers Anonymous, just like there's Alcoholics Anonymous, and there are multiple groups. I believe the Coogee one, South Coogee, is very positive and really lovely for people to join. But again, sometimes people want to be out of area, and there's a website where you can look up all the local Gamblers Anonymous groups. We don't necessarily recommend Gamblers Anonymous, but sometimes that's what people really choose. They want to go along and have like a self-help group. There's also a women's only one on Sundays, I believe, online. There's one as well for families, partners, and other people affected by gambling. It's called Gam Anon, quite confusingly. So I'm not sure if this is actually a link. No, it's not. But have a Google of Gam Anon if that applies to you. I'm not sure if this will be uploaded, Shauna, this thing. I've put lots of links up here, but there's lots of videos and things, or what happens in your brain when you gamble, problem gambling explained, for people who are interested in reading more.
Yeah, we can attach those links to the website when we're uploading the video
Sure,
after. People can access them if they need to.
Thank you. And that's all I prepared to talk about today. So if you would like to email me, that's my email address up the top. And there's also a QR code if anyone would like to provide me with any feedback. We'd love to hear it. But yes, I wonder if anyone has any questions or...
There's just one question that someone has asked, how to help someone who believes a win is coming or due to them despite repeated losses. Have you any suggestions?
Well, I think that's the number one sign of a gambling problem, actually. The kind of the chasing aspect of continuing to believe that their luck will turn around or that they need to win the money back that they lost. So it's called the gambler's fallacy, which is not a nice name, but it's the kind of particular thought that people with a gambling problem may have, where number one, they will win for sure, and number two, they'll walk away with it and there'll be no other gambling after that. So that's a really common one. And we in treatment will talk about the odds and how the different forms of gambling work to help that person to evaluate that thought when it comes into their mind. But it's really hard. So that's a really clinical answer. It's really hard when you're the one in that person's life saying, I don't think, why do you think that's the case? Or that hasn't happened so far. All these kind of probing questions could have a bit of a negative response.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think asking open questions and being curious about the answer though is a good start.
And just for anyone tuning in today, what can they do if someone is struggling? Do you need like a GP referral to attend Gamble Aware? Can you just turn up to the St. Vincent's Clinic, or what are the...
Yeah, actually, did I not say that? I'm so sorry. That's a good question. Thanks, Shauna. So you don't need a GP referral. That's our number there at the top, 83829601. If you'd like to come here, that's the phone number that you ring, and then you have a conversation about your preferences. Do you want to see male or female? What your age, what your date of birth is, some things about your gambling, just really brief conversation. And then you go on our wait list, because unfortunately we have a waiting list, and then your clinician will call you to make your first appointment. But that's it. It's a one-to-one, you don't need a referral, or it doesn't need to go on any other records. And that's our email address as well, if you prefer email.
And is there a fee attached, or is it a free service?
No, it's a free service. Yeah, it's funded by gambling revenue, as I mentioned before. So sometimes people find that a bit odd, that we would work under those kind of restrictions, but it's not that. There's no restriction for us in that. I don't think such a well-provisioned service would exist if we were part of like the public health funding. So I have no problem in taking gambling revenue money to help people with gambling problems. So yes, in a way, people have already paid for it when they come along.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Yes, I have a question, Kate. In terms
Yeah,
of
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you, because I can't see you at the moment.
oh, there we are.
Far away.
In terms of helping someone, do you find that it's beneficial for them to understand how the system works and how certain gambling apps or the pokey machines are actually designed to keep them spending money. I mean, does the awareness of that kind of crack through their desire to keep betting or to keep gambling?
Well, it's been proven that that is an ingredient of all successful treatment for gambling. We call it psychoeducation, but it is just what you said. It's education about what happens in their brain, what's happening in for example, the pokey machine, what the odds look like, what randomness is, quite a bit of maths. So we have like a set program based on evidence. What I see clinically, for some people, that's not important. They already know. And for other people, it actually does make a real difference because they use that information to then question some of their thoughts or respond differently. So that really varies, but that's one of the main ingredients that we think that the evidence says works for people. Yeah.
But because I know socially, when I have been around people who are gambling, they think that they know the system, and they've got the skills to beat the system in some ways. Like, for example, if someone's on a pokey machine and they're putting money in, and it's like, okay, right, we'll move on. And they're like, no, I have to stick with this machine because this machine's going to pay out.
My money's gone into it. Yeah, that's it. I think I think we're all vulnerable to that. I've seen a programmer, so somebody who makes pokey machines and makes the games, come through for treatment. So we are all vulnerable to it. It can look humorous or it can look odd from the outside, when people have certain strategies and things, but we evolve to see patterns in things. We're seeing, the fish spawn in this and this season when the leaves turn or whatever in this river. So that's how we evolved. And so now when we see pokey machines, we might see patterns where there really aren't patterns because it's an unnatural thing. Yeah. So I think talking that through and talking through their system can be really helpful too. Yeah. But it's often positive, it's very tempting to believe that you know what's up or you've got the edge, or it will have happened before that person will have won as well, and that's very reinforcing.
Exactly, yeah. And I suppose just on a side note, I know for myself, as you mentioned, coming from Ireland, it was a sort of very eye-opening experience to see the prevalence of gambling in Australia. Pokey machines in every bar, which would not be the norm at all for Ireland. It just doesn't exist for us. And seeing,
well, it does exist on the high streets, right? Is it the fruit machines?
We sort of have like sort of arcades or amusement centres, but they would be not as frequent. No, you wouldn't see them as much.
And they're slower, and the jackpots are lower. So we're in pretty much every metric. It's much, much worse here. You're absolutely right.
And also just to see the engagement across all ages, because when I was doing my regional work in regional New South Wales, the older generation, it was like their day's entertainment to go and sit in the RSL club and put money through the machine. So I thought that was quite sad that was what the options were.
Absolutely.
So is it a lot of the time a boredom issue?
Well, I think there's a number of social reasons why that might be the case, but I'm guessing as much as you are. I know that when my grandmother went into a care home, her care home would have a bus that went to the RSL. So it's supported by, I don't know, like it's not that care home's fault, but it's almost a cultural thing that would be supported as a way for people to get out and about and do that. So, but yes, I think that, especially with women of that older generation, I think because that is quite prevalent, maybe it is a way to safely access like what feels like a social activity. And it's open 24/7 in lots of cases. People may know your name. You may be able to have, or you can have a glass of wine or something. There may be ways in which that feels like comforting, familiar, safe. When of course it can do some damage too.
Exactly. Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're most welcome. So yeah, as I say, if anyone does have questions or feedback, please let me know. But are there any other questions now, things that I missed? No, I suppose not. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Kate. From everyone on the Irish Sport Agency, thanks so much for taking the time. You have such a busy schedule with family and work life, so we do appreciate your time tonight. And definitely, if anyone is listening tonight and if you are struggling with gambling addiction or any mental health issues, please do reach out. As you see, Kate is lovely inside in Gamble Aware and we'll be happy to help anyone. So the resources, yeah, we'll attach them to the video. So if anyone does want to get any of the information that you've had today, we will put them up with the slides. So thank you so much, Kate, for your time. Your
Thank
information
you.
is amazing. So we do
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to get in touch, if you don't want to access a public service, that's totally fine. We have lots of other recommendations of private practitioners or people that you could see, or questions that you might have. It might just be a one question thing. So we'd love to hear from you. So thank you for having me.
Thanks
Lovely
so
evening.
much. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.
You too. See you.